Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Rayner, and I'm one of the consultants at Nolan. And this afternoon, I'm going to be taking you through the year-end close. The chat that you have on the right-hand side for GoToWebinar will allow you to enter any questions that you may have during this webinar, which will last around half an hour. So if you do have any questions, because you're all on mute, I won't be able to hear any of you talking if you're trying to. So please enter any questions that you might have in the chat window, and I will get to answer those at the end, or alternatively, you can forward any questions that you have afterwards into the office. Okay, so this webinar it's basically been designed as an aid to assist you in carrying out your year-end process. Okay, so whether you're new to GP and this is your first year-end, or whether or not it's a refresher for you. Obviously, it's not something we run on a regular basis, so we tend to forget what needs to be done on a year-by-year. Okay, so I want you to be aware of the steps and feel as though you're able to sort of take those appropriate steps to complete your year-end. There are a few steps to be considered as part of the year-end, so I understand it seems a little daunting to ensure that you get all the right steps covered and in the right order, which is quite important. So by getting the year-end right and taking the appropriate steps to ensure that you have accurate reporting and inquiry to take you forwards into the following year. If the year-end isn't carried out in the correct order and you take the correct steps, it could end up with some issues with your data and incorrect reporting figures. So all of which, if they're not addressed at the time, could have an effect on your finances as the year goes on. So it's important to get it right first time around. So regardless of which version of Dynamics you're currently on, the processes are very, very similar. There are some new features that have been added in some of the more recent versions, which you'll see, and you'll sort of notice as we go through the webinar that there's basically a general theme, okay, which is comprising of backing up, okay, which is very important, and posting, get all your transactions posted at the correct period, and then the close that takes place, okay, so backing up, posting, and closing. So I'm going to walk you through the modules in the order that they should be closed. And if you don't happen to use that module, or I mentioned that the module is an optional one to close, then you can make the decision as to whether or not you do or you don't want to close it. But obviously, if you don't use the module, then you don't need to close it. Okay, so let's take a look. So the steps in the order in which you'll be covering your year-end will go through the inventory, receivables, payables, fixed assets, analytical accounting, and the general ledger. Okay, so that's the order in which your year-end close needs to happen. My slides can be made available to anyone that wishes to use them, because each of the sections I've put some useful links on there which will take you to more information about each of these modules and more detailed steps for each of those sections. So don't worry about necessarily having to write it all down. Definitely is available to you to refer back to. First step is backing up. Okay, so this is your starting point. So if anything were to happen at any future step along the way, you will have a point in time in which to refer back to and to restore back to, so you can start the process again without any issues. It could be that there's been some sort of power fluctuation, or it was unable to complete the process for whatever reason, and if you have to go back to a certain point in time, the key one is definitely the one at the beginning and definitely one at the end. Depending on how large your databases are, I'll point out the other ones to take as we go through the steps. So once you have your backup, then we're looking at inventory. Okay, so as you can see, there are some links that we have on there. So basically your inventory module should be closed at the end of your financial year, so as close to the year end as you can get it. Okay, so before any transactions has been processed that would affect those quantities within the year that you want to close. Okay, so we need again to get that close to the year as you can, so that those posted quantities are taken into consideration for your current year and not the future year. The year-end process for inventory will transfer all of your any summarised current year quantities, costs and sales amounts for the items which you've been keeping any summarised sales history update. Each of the items beginning quantities will be updated as well, quantity on hand for each of your sites. Zero any of your quantities sold in the item maintenance window for each of your sites. And during the year end, it gives you the option of whether or not you want to remove discontinued items, remove sold receipts, remove any sold lot attributes, and update item standard cost. Some of those may vary depending on which version of Dynamics you're on, but those are the options that you have on the year end close for inventory. So let's just take a look at the steps that we need to go through in order to close the inventory module. So into GP, and first of all, we need to post all transactions. So I'd advise using the series post for inventory, and this will list all of those batches that are still in the system awaiting to be processed. If you expand, so you're seeing both of the lines, you're able to see if it was a recurring batch, when it was last posted, and the frequency of that, and then the others would be single batches, and then you need to just make sure that every growth batch within the period that you're about to close has been posted. Okay, you can just do a mark all if that's relevant, and then post them all at the same time. Secondly, would be reconciling your inventory. So this will just go through and ensure that the quantities are correct. So on-hand quantities, sold quantities, and just basically balances those and make sure that those figures are accurate, again, prior to your year-end close. So depending on how large your inventory is, you may want to just do a from and to on that, just to break it down to a smaller group of items. But if it's not overly large, then you can just press all and allow them to all go through. You may want to complete an inventory count. Now you can do this outside of GP, although it does have its own inbuilt stock count section where you can basically build a range of items that you want to carry out a count on, and then it will go and look at the items that you've got, the quantities that the system thinks you've got, and then we can compare it and enter those in GP, and any variances will be processed through as inventory adjustments so that your stock is then brought in line. You may want to create some additional reports. Okay, so whether you've got any turnover reports or transaction history or lot number list, serial number list, that type of thing. So this is your opportunity to basically print any of those reports off so that you've got a record of those prior to the year-end close. So then we have your year-end close for inventory, and these options of discontinued items and sold lot attributes I mentioned earlier are all optional. So if you were to mark these, then those would actually be, if there were no outstanding sale items for the discontinued items, then those would all be removed. And again, any attributes against discontinued items, those would also be removed. And you can also clear down any sold receipts prior to a certain point in time if you wanted to. So you could place the date into here and remove those as well. And you can also update the item standard cost, so it would go through and basically match that to be whatever you have as a current cost, which is the most recent price that you used against that item. Okay, so just key things on here are just making sure that you're processed and posted any of the transactions prior to the year-end close, and then running obviously the steps that we've gone through, and then just updating whether or not you want to remove any of those discontinued sold items and update the cost, etc. on there. Okay, then after that you can process it, and it will go through and update your on-hand figures and the sold figures as well for the items, and any inquiries where you're seeing year-to-date and last year-to-date values based on inventory, those will also be updated. Okay, so you won't get a year-end closing report for inventory, but it will basically go through and allow you to make these changes and updates to your inventory module. So at this stage, after your inventory has been done, let's take a backup, and then we can move on to the next part of the year-end process. Okay, if you have a very small inventory, then and everything went through okay with it, then you may not want to take a backup at this stage. Okay, but it's just really so that you don't have to go through every single step again if you had to go back to the very beginning. So next we have accounts receivable. So closing accounts receivable, again, because there are some date-sensitive fields within the accounts receivable module, we should close this as close to the year end, not on the day, so that you can get an accurate last year and current year figures for your accounts receivable. Okay, so basically any of those inquiry screens, which is the sort of annual summary screen where you're able to see last year and current year, those are the screens that get affected and when you actually do a year end. So, and things like Smart List as well, you tend to look at the actual date that you run your year end. So you just need to be aware that if you were to close it 20 days after your year end and you've processed some transactions, regardless of what date those were posted on, they will actually be taken into the last year, and the current year would be anything from the 21st onwards. Okay. So the steps that we need to take for the year-end process for receivables, again, we need to get everything posted. So if you need a sales series posting to do this, again, you can do a mark all and post, but if you know you've got batches that you've entered into the system that are dated for the following year, make sure you don't tick those and you're only marking the ones that need to be posted into the year you're closing. Next will be print or go through your aging process. Okay, and after you've done this process, you can then print any of your aging reports that you want to accompany that as well. Okay, so ensure you change the date so that that matches the year-end date, and then you can run that process. Now, there's not a whole lot else on the receivables management. So any other month-end type processes, so obviously doing any of the statements, etc., and things like that, you may well have already done those, or you might be doing them as part of your year-end process, but these are just the key points to do to actually close the year. And then we just go to the RM year-end close window. You have the option here, if you're using both the financial and calendar year, they're both the same date, then just say all, and it will just close both financial and calendar on there. Now, if you have never done a year-end close before on receivables, then obviously your dates will show as 00 for your last closing date. Otherwise, they'll actually show on the date that you previously closed it. Just make sure you haven't closed it twice. Okay. So, and then you have the option to print the report at the bottom, which I advise you to do. I do tend to find that having a PDF, sending the reports out to PDF is better, just because they look nicer when they're saved. Text reports and CSV file reports, so they don't sort of tend to look overly nice if you have to revert back to them. So I tend to print PDF for the report. You can just look a little bit neater and you can sort of look back over them. Okay, so if you did want to just individually close them, you can choose financial, and that can be closed usage calendar and close that if you're obviously having to close them on different dates. So if your financials was running from the 1st of April, then you'd need to come in and at the close of the 1st of April to get accurate figures for that. Okay, but the type of inquiry screens that I was referring to that would be affected would be like the debtor yearly summary inquiry, which you can see here. I've got life to date and year to date. So that would always be the case if I never ran year end on my receivables. So as soon as I run a year end, everything from that point going forward would then be my year to date, and then all of these figures would then move into my last year. Okay, you can choose to do filter based upon the different views that you see on here, so amounts since last close, and that will just show you based on the date that you actually did the close. But financial calendar should show you on your actual calendar and financial year inquiries. Okay. Okay, that's receivable that's being closed on there. Okay, I'm going to go straight through to accounts payable, which is pretty much the same as your accounts receivable. Again, you want to make sure that you've got everything posted, and again, basically sort of on your year end, so you make sure that those sections fields do pick up your correct last year and year to date figures. They're not mandatory, both accounts receivable and payables, they're not mandatory. It's really if those types of fields are important for your inquiries and summaries, then you do need to basically close those, okay, but they are classed as optional. So going through a very similar process, so you've got your purchasing series post, again, just checking, making sure that everything is processed and that you haven't, let's say, accidentally processed one of your batches that maybe are running monthly frequency. So just make sure that you have processed the last one, but not into the new year, and then mark the relevant ones and post those. Okay, so then you might want to be able to sort of print your trial balance report. I would suggest that you use the trial balance with options, and to be able to generate that and keep that to file for your records, as with all the other types of reports that you're running. Okay, so next you'll then be able to just close the year. Again, just to demonstrate, one of the inquiry screens that would be affected during the year end would be the yearly summary inquiry, where again you see year to date, last year and life to date. So in order for these figures to be accurate, when we're looking at the amount since the last close, running your year end at your actual year end would be the ideal scenario there. Okay, and then your year end close, so basically the same as receivables. You can say all if they're both the same for your calendar and your financial. If not, and you're running it at year end, end of December, say you can just do your calendar one. Okay, again, keep it ticked so that you can print the report, which should be there by default, and then you can close the year at the bottom there. Okay, again, at this stage, it would be a good idea to take a backup. Okay, so at this stage, if anything had happened during payables and receivables, you'd be able to go back to the one that you had prior to closing inventory. So at this point, again, it would be a good time to have a backup. Next section we're going to look at will be fixed assets. And I know not everyone uses fixed assets, obviously if you don't, then you don't need to worry about this. The fixed assets should be closed. We're working through these in the right order, but it should be closed after payables. Okay, so there's a link between the purchase ledger and fixed assets in that capital items can be added to your asset register through the postings of purchase transactions. So it's important to make sure they're all processed so that we can then make sure that all the assets have been added into the correct year. Okay, so Most of the time, people just tend to use one depreciation book, but it's important to know that the year end needs to be run for each of your assets, each of the depreciation books. Okay. So the year end process will basically go through, and on your assets, it will update your year-to-date maintenance amount and update those beginning quantity fields as well. And your year-to-date depreciation amount will be cleared, and then it'll go into your prior year depreciation. And then you have the life date depreciation will be updated as well. So quite a lot of those fields that we see for fixed assets will be, you can see those on the asset book. So where you see year-to-date and life-to-date depreciation, those figures will be updated during the year-end process. Okay, so in some of the more, in 2015, the fixed asset was amended, so you weren't able to just change the year that you're currently working in. So it's important to know that if you're doing a year-end on fixed assets, you actually have to run a year-end process for it, and not just change the year, because that doesn't update any of these figures. It can cause you a bit of aggravation within the system if it's not done as a proper year end. Okay. So it's important as well to make sure that any retirement transactions that need to be entered are entered and processed. Because you are not able to undo retirement transactions that have been performed in a historical year. Okay, so it's fine to undo retirement transactions that have been done in the same year, but you need to make sure that those have been done and to the best of your knowledge, obviously accurate within the historical year or the year that you're going to be closing. Okay. Any assets that need to be added, they should be processed, and the GL posting should be carried out so that you're able to then process those and update the asset cost within the GL. Okay, same with depreciation. You should make sure that the depreciation has been run and that too has been posted through the GL interface. You might want to print, once you've done your depreciation, sort of print any of the fixed assets reports, such as some of the activity reports, some of your additions, any retirement, transfers, depreciation, those just any sort of reports that you use on a regular basis that you need to be able to record. You just need to go through and make sure you've got a copy of those. Okay, so you can use the standard reports there within GP. The fixed asset year end, you basically choose the books. I just have one book and most people do, and then you can basically say, this is the book that I want to run a depreciation on. It gets inserted in, and then you can continue, and then that will go through and actually make all the updates to your assets and move your current financial asset year onto the following year. Okay. In most cases, people have got the default asset calendar runs up until 2,199. So you should have enough years on there, but if for some reason if you change that and you didn't allow the system to use the default when it's creating its years, you should just make sure that you have obviously got calendar years set up that run well into the future for your future assets that you're going to add onto your ledger. Okay, so fixed asset has been closed down. And then at that stage, we're going to take another backup of your data. Okay, to make sure that all your data is secure. And next we'll just discuss analytical accounting. Okay, not a lot of people, it's probably something that maybe most of you don't necessarily have installed, but is a product that gives you more analysis against your GL code when you come to entry transactions and reporting. And there's no real year-end close for this, okay, but it will close and make the adjustments that it needs to as part of the year-end process. It's just worth noting that if you are looking and you do receive a specific error during analytical accounting, which refers to running a history utility for closed years to recreate your analytical accounting balances forward, then there is a knowledge base to assist you with resolving this. Okay, so if you do receive an error on analytical accounting, there is a full knowledge base on there. So it's just sort of something to note, really. Okay, but there's no specific year-end process for analytical accounting. Okay, which brings us on to the general ledger. Okay, so you're almost done, and the year end is nearly completed for you. So into GP. Again, we're going to be sort of working through same sort of steps that we have been previously. So again, we're going to use the series post. I have been using series post per module just because not everybody has access to all of the modules, so maybe particular departments would be using series post that's relevant to their role, but you could use master posting, which would list all of the modules, and you can work through them in that way. But maybe certain people use the specific areas of the system, so I'm just using the series post for each one. So again, series post. And again, we're checking the same sort of things, to know what's the frequency, has it been posted, and mark the ones that we need and close them. Okay. It's important to know that you have the correct account type associated to your chart of accounts, so that we know the P&L accounts and balance sheet accounts, because obviously those accounts are going to be affected during the year-end process and will be treated differently depending on whether or not they're balance sheet and P&L. So we need to make sure that they are the correct accounts. Okay, so you can do that through the standard GL account listing. So you can get a list of the all accounts through here, or you might want to do that through a smart list, where you'd be able to go and pick out one for the accounts on here, okay, and then a list and tell you the posting types of each of those accounts. So you can just sort them in whichever way makes most sense for how you've created your accounts, and just verify that you've got them set up correctly. Okay, so as your P&L gets closed to your retained earnings accounts, obviously if some of those are set up as balance sheet accounts, then you'll have the incorrect figures being pulled forward. Okay, so we need to make sure that before we close the year that we have a new year created in the system. So we need to just check and make sure that we have the following year created, and that the financial period for the new year is open. And as part of any of the previous closes that we've done for inventory, receivables or payables, you may want to close those as you went through each of those ledgers, and just decide at what point you actually want to stop people posting to those. So just prevent that from happening by closing the period on here. Okay, so as long as you've got your new year created and the financial series is open for the new year, and for the year you're closing as well, then that's good. So in the general ledger, I just want to check that when we come to do the close, one, that we have a retained earnings account in here. Okay, so that must be populated. And also maintaining the history. Do you want to be maintaining the history of accounts and transactions? If you're using the budget transactions, then you can tick that option in here as well. If you want to allow posting to history, which after your year-end process, if you need to make any adjusting entries, you would need to have that option marked so that an adjusting entry can be made. If the year has closed and you put an adjusting entry into that closed year, it will update the balance brought forward figures into your new year, okay, which is obviously quite a big relief for most people because they do have quite a lot of adjusting entries that need to go through. So you must make sure that that option is marked on there. Okay, so those are the key things that we're checking for the year-end close. Next, any reports. So it might be that you're doing your trial balance that you're doing through GP. You might be doing that through Management Reporter. You might have some other external reporting tools, but make sure that you've got all of the financial reports at this stage prior to closing your year-end. Okay, so detailed trial balance and any financial statements. Okay, and then you have the year-end closing. So it just confirms the retained earnings account that it's pulled through from the general ledger setup. You have your staffing journal, which you can update if you want to. Most people just tend to let those roll on. And then you have the year that is going to be closing. If you want to, and you've got any unused segments or on the system, then you can say and tick to say yes, I want to remove any unused segment numbers. So any segments that don't have are not assigned to any of your accounts, then those can be removed just to sort of tidy those up. If you want to maintain inactive accounts, you must tick that. If you don't tick it, it won't maintain the inactive account for you. Okay, so you then, once you tick it, have the option to say, okay, well, I want to maintain the inactive account for the ones with budget amounts, or I want to maintain all inactive accounts. Okay, so if any of those accounts are inactive or don't have any balances, then you can basically get rid of those unless they have budget, or you just maintain all of them. Okay, if you want to get rid of them, you can leave it unmarked. So some of these options in some of the more recent versions of GP, and they have the last closing date and also the progress bar that runs here. So before, when the year end ran, you basically, when you go to close the year, it would run and you wouldn't really have any idea as to whether or not it has finished or how far through the process it was. So in more recent versions, they've actually created this progress bar. And also, if something were to happen during the year-end process, not necessarily if there was some kind of issue or error during the year-end process, I would go to backup. But if by accident, for example, you clicked close the year twice and it closed the following year by accident, then you could reverse the historical year and it would reverse that year for you. So there's now that option in some of the more recent versions of GP. Okay. But once that's been done, make sure you keep the report, the closing report that's been generated. And during that process, all of the screens where you're sort of seeing your current year's figures, they will all be updated, and the closing routine basically moves all your profit and loss accounts to your retained earnings. Okay, so as I say, you can make postings into that closed year if you need to. So that basically concludes the year-end process. But finally, you must make sure that you have your final backup, okay? Because this is for the auditors. They, really want to utilise this. So at least you have one at the beginning and you have one at the end. Okay, so I'll just check and see if there are any questions that have come through as we've been going through. If you think of any other questions, then the details are on the screen there that you can use. And I'll just check and see if there's any questions that come through.